Okay, geometry students, today we are going to use side, side, side in the coordinate plane. When we are given coordinates, we're going to determine whether the triangle PQR and the triangle XYZ are congruent to each other. In order to do that, we need to utilize our distance formula. Okay, so let's find out what the length of PQ is. When we use the distance formula, we have 5 plus 3 squared plus negative 4 minus 7 squared. When we start to simplify this, we end up with 64 plus 121, which is the square root of 185. All right, now let's find the distance for QR. We have negative 3 minus 0 squared plus 7 minus 2 squared. And when we start to simplify that, we have 9 plus 25, which becomes the square root of 34. For PR, we have the square root of 5 minus 0 squared plus negative 4 minus 2 squared. And when we simplify, that gets us 25 plus 36, which simplifies to the square root of 61. Okay, so we found the side lengths of our triangle PQR. Now let's find the side lengths of our triangle XYZ. For XY, we have negative 2 minus 9 squared plus negative 1 minus 7 squared. And when we simplify, that gets us 121 plus 64, which becomes the square root of 185. Now let's find the length of YZ. And 9 minus 3 squared plus 7 minus 2 squared. And when we start to simplify, that is 36 plus 25, which becomes the square root of 61. And the last one, we have XZ. When we find the distance for XZ, we have negative 2 minus 3 squared plus negative 1 minus 2 squared. And that becomes the square root of 25 plus 9, which is the square root of 34. Okay, so if we take a look here, we see that we have PQ, which is the square root of 185, and XY, which is the square root of 185. So there's one side that's the same. We have QR, that is the square root of 34, and we have XZ, which is also the square root of 34. And then we have PR, which is the square root of 61, and YZ, which is the square root of 61. Because we have these side lengths that are the same, that means that these triangles are congruent. And the reason for that is by side, 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 triangle PQR is congruent to triangle YXZ because PQ is congruent to XY, QR is congruent to XZ, and PR is congruent to YZ. Okay, pause that if you need to copy all that down. And I would like for you to try number 2. So pause your video and use the distance formula for number 2. Find the lengths of PQ, QR, PR, and then find the lengths of XY, YZ, and XZ. Okay, so when we take a look here, we can see that the length of PQ ends up being the square root of 221, and the distance of QR ends up being the square root of 232, and the distance for PR ends up being the square root of 41. And if we look at the XY, its square root, or its distance, ends up being the square root of 221. So we have one match. When we look at YZ, we see that the distance ends up being the square root of 82. There is no match on the other side there, so that's going to tell us that these are probably not going to be congruent. But let's take a look at YZ, just in case we made a mistake here, or excuse me, XZ, just in case we made a mistake here on YZ, and we see that the distance for XZ is the square root of 101, which again, we don't have a match for over on the left-hand side here. So we can say, are the triangles congruent? Triangle PQR and triangle XYZ are not congruent because they do not have 3 pairs of congruent sides. Okay, that's it for this video.